Hello friends, welcome to CEC Live Lectures. Dear friends, with our ongoing series on gender and education, today we are going to talk on gender and education development, and today we would be covering some of the policy implementation. And for the discussion on the topic, we have with us in our studios Dr. Shruti Vip. Dr. Shruti Vip is Assistant Professor in Department of History, PGDAV Evening College, University of Delhi. Dr. Vip has immense experience and she believes in sharing her knowledge with the students. So dear friends, we believe that through her experiences, we are going to understand today's topic in detail. If you wish to ask questions from Dr. Shruti Vip on today's topic, then do call us through our toll-free number. Our number is 1800-110-430. I repeat, our number is 1800-110-430. Now, I would like to welcome our guest, Dr. Shruti Vip, and I would request her to explain us today's topic in detail. Hello, ma'am. Welcome to the lecture.
Hello, Geetika. Thanks a lot for giving me this opportunity. In today's lecture, I would be speaking on gender and education development. For the last couple of lectures, I have been speaking on evolution of education policy with special reference to gender. And then we also discussed how post-independence, some changes came about and what were the important commissions and committees that were held from time to time in order to bring about some positive reforms in the field of education. Today we would be talking about what have been the gender implications of the various policy initiatives. But before that, we need to understand, as we are discussing the issue of gender and education development, we need to understand as to what is the role of patriarchy as the various patriarchal implications are bound to affect any policy initiative that is undertaken. This was true both for the colonial period and continues to be important even in post-independence India, and as far as the present context is concerned, it is still gender and patriarchy which continue to influence the outcomes. So it is not important only to talk about the initiatives or what are the various benchmarks that have been set aside while making the policy initiatives, but also what are the guiding forces that continue to play a very important role, and willingly or unwillingly the outcomes definitely get influenced by those concerns. So right at the beginning of the lecture, let me briefly discuss the issue of patriarchy, as it is still it continues to influence the very functioning of society, particularly Indian society. So if we talk about the ideology of patriarchy, it can be described as an ideology which considers that men are superior to women and they have a right to rule women. So this particular ideology has permeated the social structures of societies throughout the world, and particularly in many Asian countries and particularly South Asian countries like India, Pakistan, then to some extent Bangladesh, etc. So these all countries are definitely experiencing, they have been experiencing the working of patriarchy very emphatically and since time immemorial. So continuing the discussion further on patriarchy, it can be described as the structuring of the family units based on the man as the father figure, having primary authority over rest of the family members. So patriarchy also refers to the role of men in society more generally, where men take the primary responsibility over the welfare of the community as a whole. The authority of men often includes their acting at dominant positions in socio-economic, political, cultural spheres, and particularly when it comes to holding of public office. And in order to fight the theory of patriarchy, feminism and feminist theory was born. I have already discussed in detail the evolution of feminism and feminist theories. So, I would just be making a passing reference, and for a detailed discussion, the students are advised to refer to the earlier lectures. Now, coming to the notion, the idea of feminism, it can be described as a philosophy in which women and their contributions are considered as very important and valid and not as secondary contributors. It is based on the socio-political, economic and cultural equality for women. The basic premise is the equality of all sexes. Then feminists can be anyone in the population. It is not that only females are supposed to be feminists. So even the male members of the society who are more aware of the problems and who are more concerned about the problem of inequality, inequity that is prevalent in society, they can also be described as feminists. Feminism can also be described as a movement or a revolution that includes women and men who wish the world more to be a place where equity resides, and without any boundaries there are resources that can be shared equally. Now coming to the feminists' view, the world is being unequal. This is one premise that all feminists recognize right at the beginning, that society, polity, economy has been unjust to women. So only after they accept this basic premise that the future theorization and plan of action takes over. Then they also wish to see the fulfilling of the gender gap. And the idea that men are superior beings and they are superior to the other sex is also a fact that they want to abolish, and they work throughout their lifespan towards achieving that goal. Then there are many different types of feminist theories, and each has had a profound impact on not only women but also on the entire discourse of gender studies. So it would be interesting to briefly have an insight about these individual theories related to feminism. So the first theory that I would be referring to is cultural feminism, the theory that there are fundamental personality differences between men and women, and therefore these have to be taken into account when one is talking about equality of rights. This theory supports the idea that there are biological differences between both the sexes, and this sexism can only be encountered, it can only be overcome by embracing the women's way. So therefore, taking into consideration special differences that have been there since time immemorial, since nature took over, between men and women, the way women are, their genetic makeup has taken shape over a period of time, must be taken into consideration, and these biological differences should be considered as the natural prerequisites for the cultural differences, and then action should be taken accordingly. The second type of feminism that one can talk about is individualist or libertarian feminist, which is based upon the libertarian philosophies with the focus on autonomy, rights, individuality, liberty, independence and diversity. Then the next ideology that one can talk about is the radical feminism. The ideology focuses particularly on the issue of social change, and it attempts to draw lines between the biologically determined behavior and also culturally determined behavior in order to free both men and women as far as possible from their previous gender roles. So therefore, as the term itself denotes, this is a far more radical, far more change-oriented school of feminism, which basically wants to question all the given categories. It basically wants to question all the given isms that have been considered as important benchmarks so far, and then assume a different, with a newfound vigor and an alternative perspective. The idea is to bring about equitable distribution of resources and rights. Then one must also talk about liberal feminism, a theory that focuses on the idea that all people are created, humans are basically created equal, and that education is the primary means of bringing about positive change in society and also to bring about an end to discrimination. So therefore, it is the philosophy of liberal feminism which lays lot of emphasis, lot of importance is given on education, and therefore it is the very relevance of this school of thought that makes me discuss liberal feminism, because we are primarily going to focus on how through education and an equal distribution of education at all levels to all the sexes can some amount of equity be brought about in society. Now, then it is also important to discuss as to how these various feminist theories are focused on one particular aspect, and that is development. And no development can be brought about without an emphasis on education. So therefore, educational policy, planning, administration, these are very crucial sectors for any government and for any country, and so they have been for India. So there is a lot of focus on bringing women into development, and the women in development approach is therefore very important, and it has been important since 1950s onwards, when India adopted the road of planning to achieve most of its economic, social targets. So therefore, this WID approach, that is women in development, has been an important initiative of the independent government that came into being post 1947, and gradually there has been a transformation from WID to WAD, that is women and development, which is basically a transformation in perspective, which does not only consider adding women as salt and pepper in policy initiatives, but taking them along and considering them as part of 50% of population, and then gradually raising the issue of empowerment as well. Now, having discussed these various themes, it is also important to talk about the issue of women in human development and economic growth, because this is where a deeper analysis can be conducted, and this is how the government can evaluate as to how successful or unsuccessful its various policy initiatives have been. So therefore, what kind of human development can best promote economic competitiveness and growth? This is very important, a question that has to be answered by all government policies and policy makers. And also another very valid question is that what kind of economic development can best promote human development? And when I say human development, it is not only an emphasis on pure economic parameters, but also on the overall health. It is also an emphasis on the overall cultural upliftment, the moral upliftment, medical facilities, good health, then empowerment, then economic independence, and overall well-being, availability of good childcare facilities, etc. So therefore, any holistic discussion on development includes all these parameters, where the human angle becomes far more and a valid point of entry as compared to pure economic parameters like the per capita income or the GDP, etc. Then also one needs to understand that there has been a shift in the discourse of development. So the feminist development critiques and feminist activism has radically altered the discourse on development, and this development did not come on its own, but due to the active demands and demand for reforms that were raised from time to time. It is no longer possible to deal with development issues by focusing simply on how to improve savings and investment functions. So therefore, the economic aspect of development is very superficial, and it is just an entry point into the discussion. The real discussion is the human angle, as I have just mentioned just now. Then also it is important to understand that economic development consists of the introduction of new combinations of production factors which increase labor productivity, and the new production factors again encompass a whole range of parameters like health, fitness, happiness, satisfaction, job satisfaction, then also morality and a far more active public life, and also a right-based approach, and not only an emphasis on the pure quote unquote economic growth or transformation of the country. So this is as a new meaning of development is far more holistic. So therefore it is beyond doubt that education has to be at the center of all policy discussions, and in addition to education, environment, medical facilities, health facilities, pollution, etc. also become equally important fields of discussion, because they all lead to a well-defined, well-balanced growth in an individual. Then coming to the aspect of recognition of the need of gender perspective, I would be continuing the discussion around gender, because we are going to focus on gender and education in policy initiatives. So the development of the debate regarding gender and education has advanced considerably since the United Nations first development decade in the 1960s took up the issue, and it emphasized on economic growth and the trickle-down approach as key to reducing poverty. So as early as 1960s, this aspect was taken up to be the most important one, and one of the notable achievements of the debate was to consider gender equality as the key development focus, and women's concerns were first integrated into the development agenda in the 1970s. So while 1960s onwards marks the beginning of this proactive thinking around gender, but it was only in 1970s that the gender and education and women rights, they became intrinsically linked, and the issues were raised at international platforms, and later on a number of countries including India adopted these as important policy initiatives. Then several changes and crises in the political economy have also played an important role in bringing about a change in perspective. For example, the South experienced severe economic crisis in the 1970s and 1980s. So basically it was the developing countries and the underdeveloped countries that were going through a period of crisis. And in the 1990s, another very important political change that came about in the world was how Eastern Europe, Russia and Southeast Asia experienced economic crisis as the effects of globalization began. So therefore, henceforth, the course of discussion was on globalization and development. So as a result of these changes that had started coming about from 1980s and 1990s, and with the strengthening of neoliberal perspectives and globalization, there were some sections in society which started getting neglected, and the issue of underdevelopment among those sections became all the more important, and the glaring inequality started increasing in society. So what were these sections? Which were these sections? These sections were again the marginalized sections like women, children, and even the marginalized sections of society who had been devoid of any control over the resources for so many generations. So basically what happened was that contradictions emerged in various countries as far as the development policies were concerned, because the development policies were promoting mass consumption even as there was a rise in poverty and marginalization. So on the one hand, while there was acute emphasis on mass consumption and influx of goods and services in the developing world, on the other hand there was also a rise in poverty. There had been a steady rise in loss of resources, loss of land resources, etc., therefore further alienating the poor from their means of production, as well as not enabling them fully to make full use of the globalizing economy. As a result, how was gender impacted by all these changes? Since gender is a socially constructed definition of women and men, and it is definitely not the same as sex, and it is definitely not the same as women, so gender came to be determined by the conception of tasks, functions and roles that had traditionally been attributed to women and men in society, both in the public as well as private life. So due to this particular approach, a clear-cut divide emerged even after 1990s between what was going to be a man's work and what was going to be a female job. So as a result, there was ghettoization of women in most of the low-paying jobs, whereas it was men who made use of the company boards, and they were not only enjoying the topmost managerial positions, but at the same time they were at the helm of affairs and they were calling the shots while taking important decisions. So then it was in this background that it was realized that it is now all the more important after 1980s and 1990s that one adopts a gender-based approach to development, because if this approach is still not adopted, then there would be no going back, and then there would be no way whereby the gender gap would be bridged. So therefore it was realized that one had to have a distinct focus on women and men, and not on women in isolation only. Then this gender-based approach to development also realizes the fact that women on their own, or any policy initiative primarily devised for women, cannot bring about positive results, because society is in a symbiotic relationship. So therefore all the sexes must have that symbiotic relationship intact in order to bring about positive and constructive change. So therefore there were certain policy parameters and issues that were highlighted, and they were incorporated by the various governments from time to time, including India. So such initiatives were gender equity, gender analysis, gender mainstreaming, and now gender budgeting. So therefore, by incorporating the term gender, it was the aim was not only to talk about women, but the aim was to talk about women in relation to men. So for example, if one talks about gender analysis, it basically does not mean to analyze that how were women faring in a particular scheme of things. It basically meant that how women in relation to men were performing or they were able to enjoy the fruits of labor, how many women were progressing, how many were climbing the ladder of success, and how many women were at the top. So basically analyzing the data in a far more holistic and comparative way, so that the reality would emerge, and somehow more positive initiatives could then be taken in near future or in next plan initiative in order to bring the gender divide to an end. So with these realizations, all these different parameters were adopted in various plan initiatives from time to time. Then also there was an increase in the women-centered research institutions, which again has been a very welcome step. And this again was adopted more in the developing countries, which needed this kind of a research-based approach. So several countries as a result have introduced new women-related research institutes and institutionalized women studies programs. And this was particularly so in China, India, Sierra Leone, and a number of African countries, Sudan, Uganda, Nigeria, Zimbabwe, etc. They have all started research work on women and development in a big way, and this research is then further taken care of by the governments of these respective countries to bring about a positive change in the overall functioning of the planning process. Then also there is the important discussion that one must undertake is that how far education has been recognized as an instrument of development, because unless and until this recognition has been made, no government is going to spend a major chunk of its resources in bringing about positive changes in the field of education. So therefore, the realization that there are countless benefits of educating women and girls has come to a point whereby various social scientists have discussed this issue in greater detail, and a number of benefits that have been highlighted by various economists, etc., are like reduction in child mortality, a reduction in fertility rate. So these issues were highlighted by the famous economist Amartya Sen and Jean Dries in their famous study on primary education, and how primary education can have far more beneficial aspects related to it, which are reflected in a way a woman brings up the children, and how she maintains health and hygiene of the family. So even if a woman is not highly educated, she is only primary educated female, and if the household is lucky enough to have a woman who is educated only till primary standards also, these are the positive changes that can be brought about in the family. The diseases and mortality are far lesser as compared to a family member who is uneducated, who is totally illiterate, and in that family the incidence of disease and hardship would be far more. Then similarly, a number of other achievements like enhancement of self-esteem, self-confidence of women, promotion of productivity and contribution to the society and economy at large, then also the ability to think critically, and also the ability to take independent decisions which are right in the interest of the family. All these were some of the highlights that emerged out of this research that was undertaken in various countries. So having discussed all these various parameters related to education and planning, I shall be taking a short break now and will resume the lecture shortly. Thank you.
With this note, thank you, ma'am. Thank you so very much for explaining us in detail about gender and education development. Friends, we will be continuing our today's lecture further. Till then, we would like to take a short break over here. So be with us. Thank you. Hello friends, welcome back to this session where we are discussing on gender and education development. And friends, we believe that in our previous session to discuss as well as discovered a lot. We promised to give you a productive session just now also, as we are going to start on it, and we have with us in our studios Dr. Shruti Vip. If you wish to ask questions from Dr. Shruti Vip, then do call us to our toll-free number. Our number is 1-800-110-430. Now I would like to welcome our guest Dr. Shruti Vip and would request her to continue the lecture further. Hello.
Thank you, Geetika. So welcome back, friends. We were discussing how beneficial any kind of investment on women's education, even if it is till the primary level, is. And in that context, I had shared with you some of the findings of economists like Amartya Sen and Jean Dries, who have highlighted these positive initiatives and how the various kind of surveys conducted have also proved the point that how a new kind of confidence emerges through education, which is reflected in good health, and also how the education of children also improves if the mother is educated. Now, ensuring equal participation in development process, therefore, has become the prime responsibility of all governments, and providing knowledge and skills for economic independence is one of the cornerstone of the national policy. Also, in this, any kind of exposure to education till any level enables women to have the right kind of confidence in their life, and also enables them to fight for their rights, because society has largely been unjust to women, and therefore through education they can again win back the rights that they have lost in the past. Now there has been a number of examples in many of the developed countries. For example, developed countries like USA, France and Switzerland are some examples where women have made an impact after long struggle. In USA, it took almost 80 years, that is a struggle of almost 80 years from 1840 to 1920 for women to get a right to vote. France also conferred its women citizens the right to vote as late as 1944, whereas in Switzerland, women were granted the right to vote in 1971, which was much later than in India. So therefore, what is the difference between India and some of these developed countries where the women got voting rights so late after independence, whereas in India the women got right to vote just after independence, and they were considered as equal and at par with men by the constitution. But still, a huge gender gap remains as far as access to education is concerned, as far as the high managerial and administrative posts are concerned, and there are far fewer women at the top as compared to men. So something somewhere has definitely gone wrong, and it is not only through educational policy and planning initiatives, but also some positive social initiatives that this wrong can be converted into right. Now, this has made the issue of study, the research on women and gender in South Asia very pertinent. So therefore, a very important statement that had been made by Mehboob ul Haq, another very important social scientist and economist. I would like to read this statement, that is, while growing up in South Asia is a perpetual struggle, to be a woman in this region is to be a non-person women bear the greatest burden of human deprivation in South Asia. So therefore, these lines definitely sum up that how, as it is, South Asia has a number of problems, poverty, illiteracy, and the colonial past. All these problems continue to influence the working of the government and the present context. And amidst those problems, if one is born as a woman, then again, what emerges is that you end up living the life of a non-person, that is a non-entity, and the greatest burden of human deprivation is not borne by any other than a woman, and this again is a stark reality even for India. Now, discussing further the South Asian scenario, more than half of South Asian adult illiterates are women. So here again you can see that any kind of inequity definitely affects women the most. More than 2/3 of South Asians out of primary school children are girls. Nearly 2/5 of girls who were enrolled in primary school drop out before grade 5. So therefore, whether it is the enrollment or it is the dropout rate, again the problem is more with the girl child and more with the females. Then continuing the discussion further on the South Asian scenario, there are some more observations that can be made, like of the already low vocational education enrollment of less than 2%, female students comprise only 1/4%. So the vocational education also is far more concerned about male enrollment. Then the differentials between primary school enrollment of boys and girls differ from 2 percentage points in Maldives to 31% points in Nepal. So this again is a problem that has been highlighted time and again. Then coming to focusing on India, let us discuss the present scenario, because some positive changes have definitely come about as a result of various policy initiatives that have been undertaken. So now there are some pockets in India where women are acquiring much greater control over their lives. Much greater equity is seen in some parts which has not been seen before, and there has been a greater access to labor markets and voting rights. However, here again there is a minus side. There are some disadvantages which have emerged as a result of a lot of research that has been undertaken. For example, the problem of exclusion continues to exist. Then also the problem of inequality. Though the Constitution completely guarantees equality before law, but then the social system is such that patriarchy does not let equality to persist. And also the problem of male domination, which again is rooted in the very principle and functioning of patriarchy. However, overall one can say that the Indian experience has been one of change. It is not that no change has happened and the situation is static or unchanging if we compare it to colonial times and the present times. First of all, there has been an unqualified priority to the issue of female education, and repeated emphasis on female education has started bringing about a positive change in society, where now even poor parents are thinking of sending their girls to schools, though another problem is that they are not ready to compromise with the limited resources that are available to the family. So therefore, when it comes to deciding between a male and a female's education, it is the boy who always gets the disadvantage, the advantage, as more resources are allocated to men's education, to boys' education. Then also the national policy addresses the problem of access to girls and especially for girls and for working children. So as a result, a number of schools are in the pipeline, or the concept of neighborhood schools has also been acted upon by the government. But then here again, the problem of infrastructure continues to exist, because most of the government schools have this problem of very poor infrastructure and lack of safety and security for the girl child. A problem that has repeatedly been outlined by various surveys that were conducted by NUPA, that is National University of Educational Planning and Administration, and a number of surveys that it has conducted. They have brought to light that how many of the schools lack any kind of boundary walls. They do not have separate toilet facilities. They do not have trained female teachers, and of course the problem of sexual harassment continues to exist. So therefore, unless and until these issues are addressed and some positive changes are undertaken, nothing would emerge even if thousands of more schools are opened every year. Then another positive change that has been brought about by the government has been the gender issues are integrated in all aspects of planning. So therefore now we do not have gender blind planning. The gender responsive planning as well as gender budgeting are some very important and positive initiatives, and this I would call is a constructive approach towards bringing about some kind of change. Then also the issue of policy and women. This again is a very interesting discussion which can undertake and which should happen around various themes and sub-themes. So I would be briefly touching upon as to how gender and planning have embarked on a series of changes in various sectors, whether it is agriculture or industry or even the tertiary sector, etc. So it is in this regard that we can talk about land reform, international trade policy, then the road construction project, conflict resolution, then fisheries department, taxation, the development of school curriculum, higher education, etc. So these are just a few of the examples, and today there is no department or no sector which does not take into account the special requirements of the gender. Then I would also like to discuss in passing reference a number of constitutional provisions which would give you an idea as to how the framers of the constitution had this very noble project of bringing about positive change in the lives of women and embarking on the road to equity after almost 200 years of colonial rule. So it is in this context that one can talk about a number of important constitutional provisions like Article 14, which talks about equal rights and opportunities to men and women, and Article 15, which prohibits discrimination on any ground. It renounces the practice derogatory to women, and it also means rights to means of livelihood to both men and women, and also equal pay for equal work, which again is a very important constitutional provision. But sadly, even till date, there are women in various industries who are not paid equally, and the government needs to look into this problem urgently. Then another very important Article 24, which talks about no child below the age of 14 years shall be employed to work in any even in any hazardous employment or any other employment. So therefore, with the problem of female illiteracy and with the culture of care and nurture being increasingly assigned to the role of women, this article again I would say is very important because it does not really disregard between the boy or a girl. No one below the age of 14 years is expected to work and even to indulge in childcare, because that would deprive him or her from the right to education. Then Article 39 says that the tender age of children are not to be abused and not to enter into educations which are not suited for their age. Then Article 42 provides for just and humane conditions of work and maternity relief. And this again is very important, not only for women but also for the newly born children. But here again a lot of discrimination still exists, because many women continue to be employed in the unorganized sector, or even if they are not in the organized sector and they are working in the organized sector, in the public sector, and if they are not permanent employees, they are not even granted maternity leave and they are not even granted any kind of special privileges which are granted to the permanent staff. So therefore, the rights of many women go unaccounted for, and this issue also should be taken urgently. Then Article 73, which provides for participation of women in the political and grassroots, and Article 74, which talks about the development process at the grassroots level, which again has empowered women in a big way. And the working of Panchayati Raj institutions is the best example that one can give of how gender equality planning process has brought women to the limelight, has not only empowered them namesake, but genuine empowerment has taken place in the rural areas and even in the urban areas at the local level, and how they are not only helping raise important local issues, but also providing some practical solutions. Then continuing the discussion on policy on gender, with our primary concern is related to educational policy. So education will be used as a basic change in the status of women. The national education system was supposed to play a positive interventionist role in the empowerment of women, and women's studies was promoted as a part of various courses. So all the universities are mandated to have women's studies cell as a very important initiative, which again conducts very valuable research on issues related to women and gender inequality. Then empowerment of women that has emerged over a period of time as a result of these various initiatives has not only brought about a greater self-esteem and also brought about a rise in the confidence of women, but it has also helped them build a positive image for themselves and also helped them in developing critical thinking ability, which again is very important as far as being a more responsible citizen and a human being is concerned. Now, due to these various parameters and necessities, planning for gender has taken up in a big way, particularly from 1980s onwards. So all the bureaus of the Department of Education are supposed to prepare concrete action plans addressing gender related concerns. So therefore these policy guidelines are there for all education departments, where they just cannot overlook the gender issues, and some concrete action plans have to be shared from time to time, and also action taken report has to be circulated. Then there are some very relevant nodal institutions like the UGC, AICTE, ICSSR, CBSE, ICAR, ICMR, and a number of state boards which are also supposed to prepare similar action plans. So therefore, no institution today can escape the process of gender planning, and it has become part and parcel of all initiatives. Then another welcome step that has emerged is the implementation of gender dimensions. So every institution is supposed to take up active programs for women's development and progress. So therefore, all teachers and instructors are also trained simultaneously as agents of women's empowerment, and there are a number of state and center related institutions like NUPA, etc. and CETs, which undertake these kind of trainings on a regular basis. Then there are a number of training programs that are designed by NUPA, NCERT, then Directorates of Education, then SECs, etc. and even the universities have made it mandatory, and the UGC has passed very strict strictures regarding this issue. So while all this has been happening, what equally is important and which has played a very important role is the availability of gender sensitive data. So it is no more a talk about a general kind of an enrollment pattern. What universities or educational institutions are producing is the kind of specific data which is called gender disaggregated data. So therefore, there are major exercises that are undertaken by the United Nations system, the Department of Women and Child Development, and the Department of Statistics. And these organizations regularly bring about data which is gender disaggregated, that it gives a complete information regarding the number of women and men separately in all kinds of enrollments or gender gaps, etc. Then to ensure that any data collected at the state, district or national level is sensitive to gender issues and is sex disaggregated, there are special departments that are established from time to time. Their work is also inspected, and then the report becomes a part of very important policy initiatives that are undertaken both at the state as well as national level. Now, having discussed these various parameters, now I would be talking about the policy implementation as to how, when one has data readily available and then the policy is also devised, then what are the initiatives that are undertaken for implementing that particular policy. However, before we embark further on the discussion, it is important to discuss the assumptions that remain active throughout and how these assumptions play a very important role in giving a positive feedback for any kind of policy initiative. So policies that appear attractive on paper are not what are required, because there have been so many policies since time immemorial, since colonial period, and then after independence also. But why the situation, the ground reality has changed very little for women? The reason is the poor implementation of these policies. So therefore, one must look at the proper implementation module. Then also, no policy is created de novo. So therefore, the policy should not be created in isolation. The socio-cultural reality must be taken into account while framing any policy. So this realization will also help in, a far more successful implementation of any policy. Then also, policy is the assembly of known elements. So therefore, all the elements have to be known, they have to be properly documented, they have to be properly taken care of before a policy is implemented, and for this it is very important that the socio-cultural context is taken into consideration. So any policy which is successful abroad, for example in the developed world, may not be as successful in our context, because we have our own sets of problems. So the policy makers must take into consideration the available resources as well as the available elements which have been active, and then taking into consideration all these factors only, the policy must be devised. Then also politicians identify a priority and broad outline solutions before embarking on any scheme of things. So therefore, prioritizing is very important, because everything cannot be achieved in single go. And in order to make a policy look very attractive, and adding goalposts which are unachievable is again not a practical way of doing things. Then success of policy implementation also depends on a number of factors. For example, it has been a tight process with few intermediaries. If a policy implementation process is a tight process, this means that basically there are no obstacles, and even if there are obstacles, there are solutions right away in order to deal with the bottlenecks. So therefore, a holistic approach which takes into consideration also the problems that might come the way, and there are ready solutions in order to tackle those problems, only then it can be considered as a tight process with few intermediaries. That is, the policy should be able to function independently without too much reliance on the other agencies or intermediaries, because if intermediaries are given very important role to play, and if they are not able to deliver, then in absence of deliverables, the policy success gets impacted. So this is again a very practical kind of a problem. Then there should be simple lines of accountability, and only in simplicity can a policy succeed. So therefore, the process has to be such that the problems are taken care of right away, and also there has to be the issue of accountability that must be resolved from time to time, and that too in immediate context. Then there should be clear prescription to minimize the scope of fudging. There should be tough penalties and rewards on each link in the chain to perform the task. Now, if there are tough penalties and there is a question of accountability as well, then definitely the policy makers, particularly in various educational institutions, would continue to remain vigilant, and the whole process would function smoothly. Now, while all these initiatives have been undertaken, but still there are deterrents in effective implementation of various policies and initiatives. Now, these deterrents also must be taken care of, and these I would be discussing in due course of time. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so very much. And friends, if you wish to give your feedback for this particular lecture, then do write to us at info.cec@nic.in, and you can watch this lecture the number of times you want it, as we are going to upload this lecture on YouTube soon. So you can access all the lectures pertaining to the series Gender and Education, as they are already there for you on YouTube. Today we are taking your leave. We will be meeting again very soon, and we are taking your leave, and we will be meeting, yes, of course, very soon, and would be discussing more under the series. Till then, take care. Goodbye. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you once again.
Thank you, Geetika.